Welcome to the deep dive. Have you ever stopped to think about that really tricky balancing act between international human rights work and, well, national interests?
It's a tightrope, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what happens when a country, a powerful one, actually imposes sanctions on a UN investigator, someone whose whole job is reporting on human rights?
Yeah, it's a pretty stark scenario.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're getting into today.
We are. We're focusing on the recent news about the Trump administration issuing sanctions against Franchesca Albanese.
Right. She's the UN Special Rapporteur for the West Bank and Gaza, a really critical role.
Okay, so let's start right there. Who is Franchesca Albanese exactly? And this role, Special Rapporteur, what does that actually mean day to day? It sounds important, but you also called her an independent investigator.
Yeah, that's a great question because independent is the key word here. She's an Italian human rights lawyer. The UN Human Rights Council appointed her, but this is crucial. She's an independent expert.
Oh.
Her job is specifically to monitor human rights in the Palestinian territories and report on what she finds. But she doesn't speak for the UN, not officially. She doesn't have, formal power in that sense. But that independence, that's the whole point. It means her reports are meant to be unfiltered, sometimes challenging assessments, things that official UN bodies, maybe tied up in diplomacy, can't always say so directly.
Yeah.
It's designed to allow for that kind of direct challenge.
Got it. So she's independent, she reports back, but she's clearly been quite vocal. What has she actually said or done that's drawn this level of attention leading up to these sanctions?
Well, she's been very direct. She's described Israel's actions in Gaza using the term genocide.
Wow, okay. That's obviously a very heavy term.
Extremely. And it's one that both Israel and, importantly, the U.S., its main ally and military backer, strongly denied. That's critical context.
Right.
Beyond just the terminology, she's also written letters trying to push other countries to pressure Israel, maybe even use sanctions themselves,
Right.
to halt the military operations in Gaza. And she's been a vocal supporter of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, issuing arrest warrants for Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, over alleged war crimes. Her backing of those warrants definitely didn't go unnoticed.
And I heard she also took things a step further, naming specific private companies. What was that about?
That's right. That was a more recent report, and it really escalated the situation. She directly accused several large U.S. companies of being complicit.
Complicit in what, according to her report?
In what she termed Israel's occupation in the war on Gaza. She pointed to Western defense companies supplying weapons, manufacturers of equipment like bulldozers used, she says, to destroy Palestinian homes.
So beyond just military suppliers?
Oh, yeah. It was broader.
Yeah.
Shipping, real estate, tech, banking, finance, even online travel sites and academia were mentioned. She had this quote, let me see. Yes. She said, "While life in Gaza is being obliterated, this report shows why Israel's genocide continues, because it is lucrative for many."
That's incredibly direct, naming specific companies like that.
It is. It marks a real shift, Moving beyond just blaming states to looking at the whole network, including corporations. That's a big developing area in international law and ethics right now.
So, given how serious these allegations were, especially naming U.S. firms, Washington's reaction, it must have been strong. What was the official justification for the sanctions?
It was swift and strong, yes. Secretary of State Marco Rubio put out a statement saying Albanese's campaign of political and economic warfare against the United States and Israel will no longer be tolerated. He also added, "We will always stand by our partners in their right to self-defense."
So, political and economic warfare. That's the framing.
That's the framing. And this wasn't the first step. Apparently, this followed a U.S. push, which failed to get the UN Human Rights Council to actually remove her from her position.
Okay, so there was prior pressure?
Yes. The U.S. mission to the UN had previously called for her removal. They cited what they described as, quote, "a years-long pattern of virulent anti-Semitism and unrelenting anti-Israel bias." They also explicitly rejected her claims of genocide or apartheid as false and offensive.
So this wasn't just about this one report then. It sounds like part of a bigger picture, a wider strategy from the administration regarding criticism of Israel's actions.
That seems to be the case, yeah. Our sources suggest this is one piece of a longer campaign, maybe close to 6 months now, by the Trump administration to counter criticism of how Israel is conducting the war in Gaza.
What else has been part of that?
Well, for instance, earlier this year, there were moves by the administration involving arrests and attempts to deport university faculty and students who are involved in pro-Palestinian protests or other political activities.
Right, and just to give the broader context of the conflict itself, for anyone needing a refresher.
Absolutely. The current war kicked off October 7, 2023. Hamas-led militants attacked Israel, killing about 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and taking around 250 hostages.
Okay.
Israel's military response in Gaza has led to, according to Gaza's health ministry, over 57,000 Palestinian deaths. The ministry notes women and children are the majority, though it doesn't break down combatant versus civilian numbers. And now, nearly 21 months on, most of Gaza's 2.3 million people are displaced, and there are huge problems getting care for the wounded. It's a dire humanitarian situation.
So back to the sanctions on Albanese, when you have a major power like the U.S. taking this step against a UN figure, the reactions must have been pretty polarized. What are people saying?
Oh, definitely polarized. Very sharp reactions. On one side, you have human rights groups. Liz Evenson from Human Rights Watch, for instance, called the U.S. decision all about silencing a UN expert for doing her job.
So silencing criticism.
That's her take. She added the U.S. is, quote, working to dismantle the norms and institutions that survivors rely on. Strong words.
And on the other side, from Israel or supporters of the sanctions.
Well, Israel's diplomatic mission in Geneva called Albanese's report legally groundless, defamatory, and an abuse of her office. They also accused it of whitewashing Hamas's actions.
Okay.
And Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, actually praised the U.S. move. He said Albanese's campaign against Israel and the U.S. had crossed the line from human rights advocacy into political warfare. So echoing that language from Secretary Rubio.
It really highlights the two completely different interpretations of her work and motivations. So what's the actual practical impact of these sanctions on her? Can she still do her job? It seems weird sanctioning an independent UN investigator.
It is weird, and it highlights that tension we talked about.
Yeah.
Special rapporteurs need to be independent, right?
Yeah.
But they also rely on cooperation from countries, especially for things like travel and access to investigate on the ground.
So can she even travel to the U.S. now?
That's actually unclear. Whether she can use diplomatic documents to enter the U.S. is now a question mark. But beyond the practicalities, sanctioning someone in her role sends a really chilling message. Well, it's a direct challenge to the whole idea of impartial human rights monitoring. It could set a precedent. Other countries might feel emboldened to push back against UN investigators they don't like. Albanese herself posted on X, formerly Twitter, basically doubling down. She said something like, "We must stop this genocide, completing the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, profiteering from the killing machine." She ended with, "No one is safe until everyone is safe." Shows how deeply felt these positions are. Okay, so let's try and pull this all together for you listening.
Yeah.
We've really dug into what a UN Special Rapporteur does, that independent expert role. We looked at Franchesca Albanese, specifically her reports, her really strong statements on Gaza, using terms like genocide, naming companies. Right, and then the U.S. response, the sanctions, the justification, citing anti-Israel bias, anti-Semitism, this idea of political warfare. And we heard those starkly different reactions. Supporters saying she's being silenced for speaking truth to power, critics saying her work is biased and harmful. Different sides see her reports and allegations completely differently.
And understanding all this, it really matters, doesn't it? Because it just throws into sharp relief the huge challenges these international human rights bodies face. The geopolitical pressures are immense.
Exactly. It's not just some obscure diplomatic spat. It's a real window into the ongoing struggle for global accountability, that constant push and pull between universal human rights ideas and, well, national interests.
Absolutely. So as we finish up, here's something to maybe chew on.
Yeah.
We live in this incredibly connected world, right? When independent human rights investigators start facing sanctions from powerful nations, what does that actually signal for the future? How effective can these international mechanisms be if they face that kind of pushback?
Yeah, and how might it affect other countries? Or even just individual activists trying to push for justice and accountability elsewhere? It raises some big questions about the future of impartial human rights work on the global stage.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.